Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Dominion with Mr. Minstrel. The game for today's episode comes from the Dominate Dominion number 100 Finals series and features Clueless versus the Goon Squad. This game is a great spectator game, so I encourage you to check out the full game in the description, but in case you're lazy like me, I've pulled out a few points of interest. So without further ado, let's get into the good stuff and start by focusing on the team compositions, as many games are won and lost purely by picks. Because of their AD carry pick, the blue team is very teamfight oriented, as most ADs can't reliably duel anyone, so they require either the full team or at the very least a bodyguard to be successful. With this in mind, the blue team has two great bodyguards, Leona and Morgana, and they're going to peel much like what you would see in a Summoner's Rift game, where the focus is on protecting your carry. This composition offers greater teamfight potential, especially in the late game. However, it is rather susceptible to assassins and dive compositions. The purple team's comp is a bit more flexible. They sport quite a bit of poke between Ziggs and Jace, but when the time comes they're going to have a very strong initiation, as all but Ziggs can close gaps really well and really put the hurt on in a melee range. This dual state offers them a bit more utility, but it does sacrifice some of their hard engage potential since they need to wait out a bit of poke first. This composition is also weak to hard initiate, because if they're ever forced into a fight before they're ready, it will be very hard for them to disengage. Now, keep in mind, there is a large timing discrepancy between these teams. Poke compositions generally have stronger early games. Their poke allows them to control zones more efficiently and as a result control the fights a bit more. Purple team bullies the blue team while they're still waiting for their AD carry to ramp up with items. But with that being said, once the blue AD carry does reach critical mass, they're able to hard engage behind that damage, thus giving them the greater control in the late game. And that's exactly how we see this game play out. The purple team dominates the first half of this game, but after about 12 minutes or so they really struggle to retain control of the jungle, and we'll get into that a bit more in a minute. To conclude our discussion of the team comps, I want to point out the final item builds. The blue team's items are very strong. Every champion has spec'd them to a specific role, be it a tank, AD, or mage. And even though two of them fill the same role, they do have unique items which avoids a little bit of overlap. The purple team, however, was not so fortunate. We see Jace and Vi building almost the exact same items, spec'ing to fill the exact same role. And in my opinion, this creates a redundancy, and thus a weakness, as one of these champions is not bringing anything to the table that the other isn't. And I think it's this redundancy, in the face of diversity, that ultimately contributes the largest to their team's downfall. Let's shift gears and talk about the bot lane for a bit. Most often, bot lane is seen as a combination of mid and top from Summoner's Rift, and the comparison isn't that far off. The lane is played out much like a Rift lane. You have a consistent creep line, you're laning against one opponent save ganks, and many of the things that make a solo Rift laner successful will make a bot laner successful as well. I think the mark of a good bot lane is in how much they contribute to the efforts in top. Whether that's pushing the lane so they can roam, temporarily trading out for a few fights, or winning the lane so hard that the enemy has to reinforce, a strong bot laner will have a noticeable impact on the top lane. This game features a maneuver that I affectionately call pulling the goalie. It's where you more or less abandon the bot lane for the sake of top. The idea being that top is much harder to capture and control, and thus it warrants more attention than your bot lane. Now, this is going to entirely depend on your picks. For instance, a Nasus is going to have a hard time making it top in time as opposed to a Shen, so pulling the goalie is really only viable with global or near global ults. There are a couple of times where Pantheon abuses the range on his ult to defend or assist the top lane at the expense of his bot. Ahri does a great job of pressuring the objective as soon as he leaves, and most of the time she neutralizes the point but doesn't get any further than that before reinforcements arrive. The strength in this play comes from two things. Number one, greater map presence. Roaming like this brings another champion top lane which has obvious benefits. Number two, walking from the fountain to top is much longer than walking from the fountain to your bot, and that in and of itself is why blue team is able to defend their point before it is captured completely. A neutral point is always going to be much easier to recover than a captured point. Personally, I think the idea of pulling your goalie deserves a bit more attention and exploration. It might be fun to try champions like Twisted Fate, Nocturne, Shen, or even fast-moving champions like Hecarim or Janna. I'm not going to pretend like the Dominion meta is completely figured out, because here's a hint. It's not. The last point I want to make is in regards to jungle control. This game has several great examples of how controlling the vision means controlling the pace of the game. When you know exactly where the other team is and how many there are, you have the strongest decision-making capabilities. You have the power to say yes or no to any fight opportunity. The advantage is even greater when the other team is still fishing for your position through the brushes. If you don't have vision of the other team, you can't pick a fight with them, and if you can't decide when and where fights happen, you don't have control of the game. There are many unsung benefits that come with controlling the jungle. Having no jungle control restricts your team's movement, and thus makes it much harder to defend and attack because you're constantly looking over your shoulder for threats. You spend a very large amount of time tiptoeing through the woods walking behind your tank, all the while the other team is preparing to pounce. The easiest way to capture any point, be it top, mid, or bot, is to get a pick in the jungle, hands down. When you pick an unsuspecting champ and rip them a new one, you immediately start a power play, much like you see in hockey. The difference being a 4v3 in hockey usually isn't game-ending, but in League it almost always means auto-lose. Once you have the numbers advantage, it's all downhill from there. Fighting under the point is always easier because you'll have that extra person to suppress the point. But even if you get the pick and can't pressure the point, you can still recall to heal and buy, and make it back on the field long before they do. Forcing a death timer is the most punishing thing you can do in League. If nothing else, it solidifies your control over the board for the next however many seconds. Both of these teams do a great job of maintaining and abusing their control over the jungle. If you learned nothing today, I really hope it's this. Jungle control means fight control. Fight control means kills, and kills mean control over the game. That'll bring us to the end of today's episode. Please watch the game for yourself and tell me what you took away from it. I would love to hear what you learned from the game, and things you think others should take away as well. Please provide feedback and let me know how I'm doing, things you liked, things you don't like, and what you would like to see changed. But until next time, I wish you the very best of luck on the fields of justice.